Hamas's Ivy League jihad. Has the October 7th massacre bled into thousands of campuses across North America? Stay with me on Our Middle East, Al-Shakal Al-Sadlana, together with Khaled Abu-Toameh. Join us. Khaled, we look at university campuses, the Ivy League first, thousands of demonstrators cheerleading Hamas, ISIS, and their Iranian taskmasters. How do we understand that?
First of all, why are we surprised? Because the anti-Israel folks on the campuses have been active for a long time, but we've seen an upsurge in their activities. Now, what's interesting is that these people call themselves pro-Palestinian. And when you talk to them, you discover that their messages are anything but pro-Palestinian. And you discover that it's more about hating Israel than helping the Palestinians. If I were, a member, someone on these campuses who wanted to help the Palestinians, I would do something positive for the Palestinians. Instead of hiding at a university campus and spewing hatred against Israel, for example, why don't you come to Gaza and defend the rights of women and gay people living under Hamas?
It's funny because so many of these self-proclaimed progressives who are demonstrating, protesting on campus would be killed, tortured, or imprisoned at the very least within 10 minutes of going into Gaza.
Where were these people when Hamas was persecuting Palestinians in Gaza? Where were they when Hamas was executing gay people? Where were they when Hamas was imposing severe restrictions on women in Gaza? Where were they when Hamas was cracking down on journalists and human rights activists? Where were they when Hamas was suppressing the emergence of new leadership and sending its militiamen to beat peaceful protesters on the streets who were demanding an end to the economic crisis over there? Well, how come we did not hear their voices? And that's why I keep saying what these people are doing on the campuses is more about hating Israel than helping the Palestinians. It's more about Israel's presence. I've met some of these people, by the way. When I took a tour of some of the campuses in the U.S., and I discovered that many of them actually share the ideology of Hamas, which does not recognize Israel's right to exist. I discovered by talking to many of these people that they are not that they are not there to criticize Israel, but because they don't believe in Israel's right to exist. And that is the problem. So what is the difference between their message and the message of Hamas? Hamas says all of this land from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea is Muslim-owned land. We want to replace Israel with an Islamic state. Now, if you are sitting on the campuses and you are chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, you're actually endorsing Hamas's charter and their ideology. I've met several Hamas people and leaders over the past 35 years, and I've talked to them. These are the same voices.
You know where this comes from, Khaled? The PLO and Yasser Arafat, who it must be said, is one of the most ingenious political operators of the 20th century into the 21st century. Because the PLO, since its founding in 1964 under Ahmed Shkeri, and then again Arafat's chairmanship beginning in February 1969, fundamentally deceived the West into believing that Israel stole a country called Palestine and essentially rebranded it Israel. And that's what has been going on in these campuses over the last 60 years. It's the most recent packaging and iteration is, as you say, support for an Islamic Waqf or an Islamic state. In their view, this is just a continuation of what they falsely believe is Israeli thievery of this state called Palestine, just to show you the success of the Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas deception that has really taken hold over the last decades on these universities.
Yes, what we see again on the campuses is more about, Israel's presence in the Middle East. And when you talk to some of these people, and again, I've talked to many of them, they do not distinguish between the West Bank, Gaza, and Israel proper. They do not distinguish between both sides of the green line. For them, all Jews are settlers. For them, a Jewish city inside Israel is a settlement, the same as Ma'ale Adumim in their eyes is also a settlement. So it's really about Israel's presence over here.
There are also 2 million Israelis, Israeli Arabs of Muslim and Christian descent as well, and no one talks about that. I mean, look, you and I are both cherished, co-equal residents of the exact same country, the exact same home, in the exact same region, and yet you see on these campuses people claim to be fighting for Palestinians when you have Israelis of Arab, Muslim, Sunni descent, meaning the same sort of ethnic background, and yet they're fighting against our minorities here in Israel as well.
First of all, Dan, you will see that many of these people are not even Palestinians. Some of them are trying to be more Palestinian than the Palestinians. And secondly, you will see that many Palestinians in the West Bank, in Gaza, and Israeli Arabs are not even aware of what is happening on the campuses. They don't know about, most of them do not even know about these campaigns for boycotting Israel. They don't know about Israel Apartheid Week that is held on the campuses. They don't know about many of these activities. They are completely detached. The folks on the campuses are calling, for example, for boycotting Israel, while many Palestinians in the West Bank are going to work not only inside Israel, but in Jewish settlements. There are more than 33,000 Palestinians who work in Jewish settlements in the West Bank. So, I mean, the irony is that for the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza and for the Israeli Arabs, these voices on the campuses seem to be much more radical than, the voices of Hamas and the Islamic Jihad sometimes. And fortunately for all of us over here, they do not pay attention to all these anti-Israel campaigns on the campuses.
What's interesting, Khaled, also in these campaigns on campuses have moved from being what they call anti-Zionist or Israel erasure to really being to focusing on genocide against the Jews. I mean, they say these words: genocide, kill the Jews. Hitler hasn't finished the job. You see these types of declarations. In fact, just before we went on the air here, I saw in the University of Wisconsin there are scores of masked men with Nazi flags, giving the Heil Hitler sign. So it looks like what began as a Hamas massacre of children and women, Arabs, Muslims against Arab Muslims and Jews altogether. There were 1,300 people of multiple religions, Christians as well, by the way, from 20 countries that were massacred, limbs cut off, families burned. We've gone through this, and yet that profound massacre, the moral clarity of there's no territorial issue here. This is mass murder of children and women, of Jews and other religions and other backgrounds. That specifically metastasized into one of the worst expressions of support for that type of jihadistic behavior. That's what's so disturbing about the picture.
Well, that's also why they're targeting Jewish students on campuses. I mean, what do Jewish students on campus have to do with what is happening over here? Which shows you that this is anti-Semitism.
Yeah, it's against Jews.
The idea that they are trying to help the Palestinians is completely false, because what they are doing is promoting anti-Semitism, and they are endangering the lives of Jews worldwide. Listen to their terminology. Listen to the slogans they use. Global Intifada, resistance, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. How do these messages help the Palestinians? I mean, these messages or these words and terms are associated with violence. Do you want to push the Palestinians towards more violence, or do you want, to help the Palestinians live in peace and security with Israel? I haven't seen any of these anti-Israel people on the campuses condemn the atrocities of Hamas on October 7, and I haven't even seen them condemn in the past what the Palestinian Authority does and what Hamas does to their own people. So I don't know. I mean, is this really about helping the Palestinians? No. It's clearly more about hating Israel, about delegitimizing Israel, and even demonizing Jews.
And I think it goes even beyond that to demonizing the West. If we take our analysis, our conversation from the campuses into the cities of the United States, the cities of Europe, look at London, hundreds of thousands collectively, hundreds of thousands of people mostly immigrants that are in London, Paris, Madrid. They're really with Daesh flags, with ISIS, Al Qaeda support, declarations, cheering. It goes beyond the university campuses into a real culture camp. I mean, it really goes into a collision of cultures, especially when you see things in Europe.
This will spill over from the campuses to the streets of U.S. cities and European cities, because we're beginning to see signs of it. You will see a rise in violence, and it will be not only against Israel, but against all these countries that are allowing these anti-Israel campaigns to take place.
Well, it's a very frightening phenomenon, actually, in New York, to talk about occupation. Let's call it From the River to the Sea campaign just occupied Penn Station illegally for the first time, and you see that law enforcement is sort of backing off and not enforcing the law. So it has become a campaign of violence, a campaign of intimidation, a campaign of harassment. I would suggest that it's very much against very much against Western values, it's against Western society. It's an imposition. It's an imposition of a type of global jihad.
It's not only against Western values and culture, it's against Western support for Israel in this war. And they're saying it openly. Hamas is saying this is a war waged by the U.S. Administration against us. These people are demonstrating there not because they're opposed to Western culture, they're opposed to Western policies. They are opposed to anyone in the West who dares to side with Israel. So they are trying to intimidate politicians and leaders in the West not to support Israel, not to side with Israel.
You know, Khaled, when I look historically, you can trace this type of rejectionism all the way back to the beginning of the 20th century, when there was a great Christian Western presence in the geographical area that we know as Greater Syria or Palestine, and there was the Ottoman Empire was collapsing, and Arab nationalism and pan-Arab nationalism was on the rise, and you saw this rejection of the British, and the rejection of the Portuguese, and the rejection of the Italians, and the rejection of the French, and the Zionists. The Zionist movement that very much was centered in Manchester, England at the time, was basically fused with this Western colonialism, Western imperialism. And in a way, you see today, Bernard Lewis called it the return of Islam back in 1976. But you really see a continuum of a regional Arab rejection of what they call the colonialist West, because they call Israel the colonialist, the imperialist, and even worse now because it's Jew hatred. It's not just Western hatred, but it sort of fuses these two ideas that began 100 years ago.
Yes, I totally agree. We need to put it like this, to understand, to look at it like this. Those who hate Israel, they also hate those who support Israel. Period. That's how it works. They see the West as being complicit in the establishment of Israel. The way they see it is that Israel is an alien body that was imposed on this region on Arabs and Muslims by Western colonialist, imperialist powers. And Israel has no right to exist. That's why I believe it's only a matter of time before all these anti-Israel groups and individuals also direct their heat against the hosting countries, the countries where they are living, France, the UK, the US. It will, as I said, it will spill over from the campuses to the streets.
But they're in France, for example, the Islamists in France are talking about really taking over France. In other words, when they protest in the streets of Paris, there is as much energy dedicated to Islamicizing Paris and France as there is to rejecting Israel.
Absolutely, I totally agree. I mean, again, these people are using the Palestinian issue or the Israel-Hamas war to push their own agenda, which is, as you said, to try to create a state within France, and this is going to be a problem for the French people.
So this is what the West seems to misunderstand profoundly, that from the point of view of the Islamists, this is a religious war. This has been a religious war. People, I know the Biden administration and Tony Blinken and the Secretary of State and President Biden was saying, oh, let's not turn this into a religious war. The Israelis have been saying that for years, and the Israelis are wrong, and the Western powers are wrong, the United States are wrong, from the point of view of those protesting on campuses and in cities across Europe and in the United States. This is a religious war.
And they're saying it.
Yeah, they're not lying about it. We keep telling ourselves a different story, but they're acting as sincere actors.
Hamas is saying it, Palestinian Islamic Jihad is saying it, and even the so-called moderate Palestinian Authority in the West Bank is also saying this is a religious war.
That's right. And now at the same time, we have representations being made by the American administration to absolutely bring back the Palestinian Authority. We've talked about this in other shows, but it keeps on cropping up as the sort of reflexive default answer to the jihad that emanated from Gaza, that massacred what is commensurate with 12,500 Americans in 24 to 36 hours. And now they're the mistaken ones, as we can call them, or the naive ones. Bernard Lewis called them the Saturday people and the Sunday people, meaning the Jews and the Christians. They are proposing a solution that's not a solution at all, but a deepening of the very problem that we just faced on October 7th.
Well, there is a new term they're using now. I mean, I woke up this morning to hear that President Biden is now talking about bringing a revitalized Palestinian Authority to Gaza.
Does that mean reformed, or does that mean reformed or re-energized?
I would love to, sit with President Biden and hear his views on that. I mean, what does that mean? For me, it means that the Palestinian Authority in its current status or structure is not good. So if you disapprove of the Palestinian Authority and you think they are corrupt and you think they cannot deliver, why are you engaging them? Why are you talking to them? Why have you been, relying on them and for the past 2 and 3 years? And why do you constantly urge Israel to help the Palestinian Authority if it needs to be revitalized and if it needs to be reformed? So I don't know. I mean, this is something we have to, to look at with some kind of humor. I don't think any Palestinian takes this seriously, not even the Palestinian Authority.
Well, 87%, you pointed this out in our last show, between 80 and 85%, if I'm not mistaken, of Palestinian men and women of voting age polled have said clearly that Mahmoud Abbas is a kleptocrat, is stealing the funds of the Palestinian people,
and they want him to resign.
That's what the polls have asked.
So I don't know. What does revitalized mean? I mean, does it mean removing Mahmoud Abbas and bringing someone else to replace him? And will this someone else be different than Mahmoud Abbas? The assumption that any Palestinian leader who replaces or succeeds Mahmoud Abbas is going to be different than Mahmoud Abbas is completely false. Whoever succeeds Mahmoud Abbas will follow in the footsteps of Mahmoud Abbas.
And that's because Khaled Abu-Toameh has said, and I subscribe to this also, the Palestinian public has been so radicalized over so many decades that any leader that would call for de-radicalization or that would call for Hani al-Hassan, one of the founders of Fatah, and himself one of the executors, if you will, of the Munich massacre, in his later years before he passed away, say we really need to rethink our past and talk about not an armed revolution, he said. Hani actually said this to me, but a revolution of interest, and he meant economy and he meant progress. He did in the last years of his life rethink where the Palestinian society should be going. But I think it's only that type of sort of brave rethinking and public statement of the rethinking that can really create a new pathway.
Instead of searching for successors to Mahmoud Abbas and alternative leaders and potential, presidents, I would advise the Biden administration to urge the Palestinian Authority to start working on changing the narrative, on, as you mentioned, de-radicalizing Palestinians. And how do you do that? Through education. You need to stop inciting Palestinians against Israel, because this incitement is driving Palestinians into the open arms of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. So what Palestinians need is not only a change of leadership, they also need a change in the narrative and the education. That's very important. And this is not going to happen over a space of 1 week or 2 weeks. It will be a long process, but let's start. We need to start somewhere.
There are young leaders. I mean, you and I have met them. I don't want to name them in order to avoid endangering them. But there are young leaders, men and women, who are highly educated, who grew up over the last 2 decades, and these are people in their late 20s, early 30s, who are very much, let's call them high-tech people interested in progress, people interested in personal success, and who want to abandon the old narratives and create a new narrative. And I would ask you, what if we gamed this out for a minute? If we were the leadership of the Palestinian, call it the Palestinian Authority, call it what you call the Palestinian Republic, or whatever you want to call it, what are the messages that could work, in reshaping a narrative?
Well, first of all, in order to empower these good guys that you're talking about on the Palestinian side, you need to make sure that the Palestinian leadership stops cracking down on them, stops targeting them, because one of the Palestinian Authority's goals is to suppress the emergence of good leadership, to silence criticism, and to prevent these young people from participating in the decision-making process. So the U.S., by funding the Palestinian Authority and supporting the Palestinian Authority, is also helping suppress the emergence of new leadership. Why don't you, if you want to revitalize the Palestinian Authority as you talk, why don't you start by demanding that the Palestinian Authority stop cracking down on human rights activists, on journalists, on political activists also. And this is very important if you want to see the emergence of these young people. Sadly and unfortunately, many of them are leaving the country. They don't stay here.
Go to Europe, go to the United States, Canada.
They see no future under the Palestinian Authority, and certainly not under Hamas. So, what we need is, since the Americans and the Europeans are involved with the Palestinian Authority and are funding the Palestinian Authority, then that's where the pressure should be. If you want, to see the emergence of these people surface and play a role in the future Palestinian society. In the meantime, it would be naive to talk about sending these people messages or anything like that. I don't see how they can come back and play any role, or how can they, emerge in Ramallah when they are afraid to speak out. If you post a comment on Facebook criticizing President Abbas, you get arrested or you lose your job.
So maybe the approach here is to take what we called the federal state approach, which we talked about back in 2006-7, which is that every one of the 7 major Arab cities under PA control is actually its own sort of mini, you call it federal mini-state or governorate or municipality, and they can, and anyway, families, certainly family structures are family, clan, tribe, local area. And so you could really have sort of a decentralized, the cynics call it cantons, like in apartheid South Africa, God forbid, but it's not that at all. These are city-states, let's say federal city-states, that can be confederated to Jordan in a certain way without threatening Jordan's demography, and they can each center, throughout Judea and Samaria in Area A can become their own profit center, their own center of pride, their own soccer team, their own local economy, and perhaps that's a better way to go.
These ideas sound very nice and very encouraging. However, how can you try to promote such ideas when the Biden administration and the European Union continue to talk about the two-state solution, about reunifying the West Bank and Gaza? They are still trapped in the old conception, which is, the Oslo Accords, the belief that, everything will be okay and you can still have a two-state solution over here and the Palestinian Authority can play some role, and only if you reunify the West Bank and Gaza, then the Palestinians will build a new future. I mean, when you look at the situation today, this sounds ridiculous and completely unrealistic.
So where do we go? Where do we go from here? What it really requires is that we at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs that are working on a number of different policy initiatives, you and I together, and our colleagues, Jews, Arabs, people who have spent many, many decades in the Middle East, and I think have a sensitivity to what the constraints are, to what the possibilities are working on also on Gaza the day after, and also what we talk about the West Bank the day after the PA. But I think this requires a lot of very deep and forceful thinking, because these mantras of the two-state solution, all of this is just getting us deeper and deeper into greater trouble. It's not helping the Palestinian public, and it's certainly not helping Israel.
This is a time, I say, to think outside the box and come up with new ideas, creative ideas. And that's what we are doing at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. We're trying to, bring Arabs and Jews together to think about new ideas, realistic ones that would help both Jews and Arabs living in this part of the world.
Well, it takes a lot of fresh thinking, and that's what I deeply appreciate, our fresh thinking, our conversations here. Khaled Abu-Toameh, my co-host, friend, and colleague for so many years. Our Middle East, Al-Shaqara Sadlana. This is indeed our Middle East, and let's hope we make it a better place, a safer place, a more secure place, and not least, a prosperous place for all of us.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Thank you.